Start with our motivation. And seeing ourselves as one sentient being amongst countless numbers. And so getting our own way, having what we want, is not so important when compared to the well-being of countless others. And yet we do have the ability to be of benefit, and if even one sentient being is of benefit to others, it has a great effect. So we should have confidence going forth in our practice, seeing that our practice makes a difference to ourselves and others, and at the same time not seeing our own temporary happiness and suffering as a big deal, so that we avoid the misery of self-centeredness and instead can open our hearts to other living beings, all of whom have been very kind to us in the past and will continue being kind to us. And so in this way, generate the aspiration for full enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. So I'm not sure what the story with the...
Tracy said that she's got the photo down there, but Zombie also has some crackles.
Oh, it does have, okay. Well, so we have a crackly phone. It's moody, as not only we are moody, but the telephone is moody. Okay, so there were a few questions and points that I wanted to go over before going into the main body of the teaching today. So one person wrote in and said that she just saw the movie Dhamma Brothers, which is about teaching Vipassana as taught by Goenkaji in prisons, and it's quite a moving video. I think we've watched it here. And so her question was, what is the difference between Vipassana as practiced in that tradition and what we do? So the term Vipassana means insight, and all the Buddhist traditions have the practice of insight. So to call one tradition Vipassana really isn't correct, because it's a meditation technique, not a tradition. So insight is referring to realizing the ultimate nature of reality, okay, and to trying to see how things actually exist, what their true nature is. So in the Goenka style of Vipassana that was included in this movie, they scan the body, they do a body scan and observe all the different sensations in the body. And then the idea is to not just scan the body and observe the sensations, but to see that all of these are impermanent, that they arise and cease, they don't last, that they are in the nature of dukkha, in other words, they're unsatisfactory, not that they're all painful, but that even the pleasant sensations are unsatisfactory and that they don't last, and that if you continue to have that particular sensation, it actually turns into misery. And then third, to see that none of those are a self. None of those are a self-supporting, a self-sufficient self. Okay? And so that meditation is combined, the body scan and being aware of impermanence and dukkha and selflessness, with gaining single-pointedness and deep meditation and realizing the selflessness of persons in that way. Within the Theravada tradition, there's a number of other Vipassana techniques. So, as you go from teacher to teacher, there will be slight variations on how that meditation is done. In our tradition, the Vipassana meditation is approached very much through reasoning, through not just through intellectual reasoning, but through really observing how our mind works and asking ourselves if things actually exist in the way that they appear to us. Okay? Because things appear to us as if they had their own essence, their own nature. And then to ask ourselves, do they really exist that way? In other words, what is the real way in which the person exists? What is the actual way in which the aggregates exist? So the purpose of the meditation is the same. The approach is a bit different. Okay. Then there was another thing, because yesterday in the morning classes we were talking about mindfulness. And so I had a few more comments because somebody had asked, can mindfulness lead you to be very self-centered? I'm mindful of the texture of the tablecloth. I'm mindful of slowly picking up the cup and bringing it, and these kinds of things. And so I was saying that that mindfulness, although some teachers use it to mean bare attention, like bare attention to what you're doing. Actually, it's more memory of what is important. When you're meditating, it's memory of your meditation object. Okay? When you're acting, it's memory of your precepts, memory of your values and principles, how you want to be in the world. Okay? So it means holding what is important in the mind so that we can stay on it in our meditation and act according to it in our meditation breaks. So it's not just bare attention on things. Okay? Because otherwise you could have bare attention of, greed is arising. I feel greed arising. I'm very mindful of greed arising. And there's that chocolate cake over there that is for lunch for everybody. And I'm very mindful of walking to the chocolate cake, picking up the knife, cutting a huge piece, putting it on my plate very slowly, very mindfully, eating it, tasting the chocolate cake, tasting the frosting, being so mindful of being so glad that I got to the chocolate cake before anybody else got to it. Okay? No, that's not mindfulness. Okay? I mean, that could be bare attention, but it's not what is meant by mindfulness practice. Okay? So mindfulness practice has to have an element of wisdom in it. Okay? Some kind of discriminating wisdom. And so we can see that mindfulness, just having bare attention to whatever is going on is a good practice to keep us from getting distracted by our stories and by ruminating and by looking all around at, because we're bored and we're craving some kind of sense stimulation. That's very good for keeping the mind focused on what we're doing so that the mind's not so scattered. But in and of itself, just being aware of the smoothness of the cloth, that's not going to increase my wisdom and get me to enlightenment. Okay? Being aware of the child laughing and that it's a pleasant feeling, that keeps me from going all over, but that alone won't get me to enlightenment. Okay? So we have to have an element of wisdom bringing in this, so that if we're feeling the cloth, we're mindful that the sensation is impermanent. We're mindful that the texture, is not an inherent external object, but it depends on our tactile consciousness and a tactile organ and a tactile consciousness, so that the object, the organ, and the consciousness are all mutually interdependent. We're mindful this doesn't exist as something in and of itself out there. We're also mindful that the pleasant feeling is simply that, but it's not a lasting feeling that has any great significance in life, and it's going to cease, so it's basically unsatisfactory, and there's no sense craving for it. Okay? Similarly, hearing the child laugh, you're not just mindful that, a child is laughing and how nice that is, but you can also be mindful, here's this, the laughing is impermanent, and if you wait, the child will be crying. And that here's a child who's a sentient being, who's completely a karmic bubble, created by karma, a completely dependent phenomena that only exists because the causes and conditions in previous life and this life came together for this child to exist. Here's a living being stuck in cyclic existence who's going to get born under and is currently existing under the influence of afflictions and karma. Mindful, here's a sentient being who in a previous life was my mother and took care of me, and cherished me like mothers cherish their children. And so I feel some indebtedness, some responsibility. Okay? So mindfulness isn't just concerned with focusing on the superficial appearance of things. It's also looking deeper. What are these things really? How do they interrelate? And so somehow leading us to generate renunciation and compassion and bodhicitta and wisdom, be it of the wisdom of impermanence or of emptiness. Okay? So this is an important aspect because people nowadays talk so much about mindfulness, and mindfulness is very effective in treating chronic pain. They're finding it's effective with PTSD, and that mindfulness meditation is effective with obsessive compulsive disorder, and all these things. And so that's very good, and that's a use of a type of mindfulness. But how mindfulness is used in those various disciplines to help people like that isn't the deeper meaning of how Buddha taught the mindfulness as a practice, which together with wisdom and a lot of other different things will lead us to liberation. Okay? So I think it's important that people know nowadays, because otherwise they could be learning mindfulness in let's say a pain clinic or something like that, and it's wonderful, it's fantastic, it's so beneficial for people to do that. But don't think that that's the entire practice of mindfulness that leads to liberation from samsara, because it's certainly not being taught in that context, is it? It's being taught in the context of how to ease the pain and suffering in this life. So it's very good because it's helping people a lot. But it's not the entire picture. Okay? So it's just good to be aware of that. And similarly, when it also came up in our discussion that, you know, we practice a lot to have a calm mind. Everybody wants to have a calm mind, okay? But having a calm mind from a Buddhist perspective is different from having an apathetic mind. Abiding in equanimity is different than abiding in apathy. And I say this because sometimes we think, okay, my mind normally it's like, oh, so up or so down, or I like her, I don't like her, you know, we're all flurrying around. So let's just get a calm mind. And then what we do with that is we tune everything out. It's like, I'm not going to let anybody disturb the calmness of my mind. You know, they can be suffering, they can be screaming at me, you know, whatever, I don't care, because I'm completely attached to having a calm mind. That's not what we're getting at through Buddhist practice, okay? What we're doing is trying to have a calm mind so that we can use that mind to, you know, meditate on the ultimate nature, to deepen our inquiry of how things exist, so that we can apply that calm mind to generating bodhicitta and seeing the kindness of others, seeing the suffering of others, so that we can apply that calm mind to having a lot of joyous effort that's not going to be a yo-yo depending upon what happens. Okay? So here I'm just talking about an ordinary calm mind. Yeah? So we don't cultivate it. And it's a good thing, you know, for everybody in society to cultivate, because if you do, you're not going to generate so much negative karma. But in a Buddhist practice, we're not doing it just so that we feel good by having a calm mind and then being equanimous. We're doing it so that we can take that calm mind and use it to really generate compassion and bodhicitta and wisdom. Okay? And so here you can see the difference of, you know, what an important difference motivation makes, and what an important difference whether we have refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha or not makes. You know, in other words, what is the framework within calmness is taught? What is the framework within which mindfulness is taught? Okay? So having this Buddhist worldview in that way is quite important to help us stay on track, so that as we develop these different abilities, we really use them, you know, as they should be. Because His Holiness talks a lot about, for example, the practice of concentration or samadhi. Non-Buddhists practice it also. Non-Buddhists attain single-pointed concentration. It's not necessarily a Buddhist practice. Okay? So it depends on our motivation. It depends if we have refuge. It depends on how we use the concentration. Okay? So that is what makes it into a Buddhist practice or not. Okay? Even absorbing all the winds into the central channel in Tantra. Even non-Buddhists do that. Even people who are dying do that. Okay? So again, His Holiness really emphasizes that practice of working with the winds and the channels and the drops, you know, it's not necessarily a Buddhist practice. It has to be conjoined with refuge, with, you know, bodhicitta, with a renunciation, with some understanding of emptiness, and designed, you know, done for the purpose of attaining enlightenment. Then it becomes a Buddhist practice. But otherwise, you know, non-Buddhists with deep meditation can also do the meditations on the channels, winds and drops, and dissolve the winds in the central channel and so on. Okay? Okay, yeah.
With the first comment about mindfulness.
Uh-huh.
What exactly is the Buddha teaching when he teaches mindfulness in the breath? Because he says that that's like his abiding in that practice.
Okay.
So, but when you go through the Satipatthana,
Mm-hmm.
then they teach it, watching the breath. It's not talking about like impermanence of the breath or, mindfulness of your precepts when breathing.
Uh-huh.
Like that.
Okay, so what did the Buddha have in mind when he taught mindfulness of the breath? Well, first of all, the Satipatthana Sutra was taught within the whole philosophical framework of the Buddha, of the Buddha's teachings. So it's not just watching the breath. The Buddha's assuming that you're going to be meditating on impermanence, on unsatisfactoriness or dukkha, on selflessness. And actually, in the Satipatthana Sutra, there's 16 different steps that you go through in the meditation. And four of these apply to mindfulness of the body, 4 to mindfulness of the feeling, 4 to mindfulness of the mind, and 4 to mindfulness of phenomena. So, when you really study what he meant by mindfulness of breathing, it isn't just watching your breath go in and out. It's actually a practice of the 4 mindfulnesses. It's another way to approach the practice of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Okay? So we begin with breathing meditation, just watching the breath. But there's many ways of doing breathing meditation. You can do it to cultivate concentration. You can do it to cultivate insight. So the techniques of how you do the meditation are different depending on what your aim is. Okay? But I found that very interesting in the sutra, how the commentaries explain the sutra itself, as that sutra is actually another approach to the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Okay. Okay. So now we will continue. We are getting near the end of this text. I'm hoping to finish it in this week and next week, but we'll see. Okay, so just to review, our author made a comment here. As was explained above, when our minds are distracted towards the self to be negated, it is not, in other words, when our mind is grasping at true existence, it is not appropriate merely to withdraw them, in other words, merely to stop the distraction to inherent existence. Nor should we meditate on nothing but a non-conceptual state in which we do not adhere to any such notions as existent or non-existent, is or is not. Okay. Nor, once we have found by reasoned examination that there is no inherent existence, we should not meditate on something other than that, thinking that it is emptiness. Okay? So in saying this, he's really emphasizing again and again that it's extremely important to recognize what the apprehended object is in the meditation on emptiness. Okay? What inherent existence, what an inherently existent person or inherently existent aggregates, what they actually, how they're appearing to our mind, and then negating that the aggregates or the person actually exist in that way. Okay, so we have to be able to discern what the object of negation is, and then see that it's impossible for anything to exist that way. And if we don't do that, we may have some non-conceptual state, we may be free from distractions, we may not have active, manifest grasping at true existence, but none of that is the actual antidote that is going to eliminate the grasping at true existence from the root. Only the mind that directly sees the lack of true existence, the emptiness of true existence, that's the only mind that can actually destroy the afflictions. Okay, so you've noticed that this point keeps coming up again and again and again. And if you read J. Rinpoche in his insight section in the great exposition on the stages of the path, again and again and again he hammers this point in. okay? Because apparently it was a big problem with in Tibet in the early years when Buddhism came there. Okay, so we have to be very clear, we're looking for the mode of existence of something. We're not just aiming for a blank state of mind. We're investigating how do things really exist. Yeah. When I say I, what is the real referent of the word I? What does I really refer to? It feels like there's something solid that's me that is referred to when I say I. But is there actually something that is? Can we find an objective referent for the word I? Something that is really me when I investigate. Okay? So to always keep in mind, this is what we should be doing. Okay? This kind of inquiry. Yeah, this kind of examination. Yeah, so you can do it all the time. Yeah. We did it on one of the retreats, remember? We did walking meditation, focusing on who is walking. Yeah, we say I is walking. Who is the I that is walking? Or I'm seeing, as I'm walking, I'm seeing trees. Who is the I that is seeing the trees? Okay? So this kind of awareness as we go through the day. Okay, now we're going to go into another section here where he talks about the techniques for actualizing serenity. That's shamatha, is often translated as calm abiding or meditative quiescence. I prefer serenity. Okay, techniques for actualizing serenity that apprehends the selflessness of persons or of phenomena. So in other words, how do we actualize a deep state of concentration that is focused on the emptiness of inherent existence of persons and of phenomena? How do we actualize that? Okay, so we noticed usually in the Lamrim that the chapter on insight comes towards the end, and just before that is the chapter on serenity. Okay, and so how to actualize shamatha, serenity. As I was saying before, just the practice of serenity itself is not necessarily a Buddhist practice, but it is an important part of the Buddhist path because we need it when we meditate on emptiness. Because if we can't focus the mind on emptiness once we've discerned it, then the mind's going to be all over the place. And actually discerning, the absence of inherent existence is going to be difficult if we can't focus our mind. So we need some ability to concentrate there. Okay, so we're going to go into a section now where he's just briefly going over some of the important points in the meditation on serenity. On Labor Day, we're going to have a retreat on this, so we'll go into it in more depth, about the object and the explaining the 9 mental abidings and the different things. So now this is just an overview of it. Okay, so it is essential to have assembled the factors for serenity so that when selflessness is the object on which the mind is focused, the meditative absorption that is to be actualized is clear and non-conceptual. Okay, so we need serenity so that when we focus on emptiness, we can perceive it clearly and without conception, perceive it directly. When our concentration is hindered by laxity and excitement, employ mindfulness as an antidote. Actually, it's usually, mindfulness is usually an antidote to forgetting the object. Okay, so when we forget we're sitting down to meditate and then the mind's off in la-la land or falling asleep or something, it's mindfulness that anchors the attention to the object. Okay? Actually, when we have laxity and excitement, it's introspective alertness that's said to be the antidote to those two, because it's introspective alertness that is aware that the mind is either falling into laxity or falling into excitement. Okay? And then through having that introspective awareness, then we apply the proper antidote to re-station the mind back on the object. So laxity is a mind, there's gross and subtle laxity, but it's a mind that's tending on the dull side that eventually will lose the object completely. But the subtle kind of laxity that they always warn us about is you're on the object, but your meditation, your mind isn't completely clear. Okay, it's on the object, but it's still lax. It's not brilliant and vivid. And then excitement is the mind that is going towards objects of attachment. Yeah. Or even the mind isn't yet on an object of attachment. You can feel some excitement, some attachment bubbling up here, and the subtle excitement is you can feel something bubbling up even though you haven't, fully gotten the attachment yet on a certain object. Okay, so we have to overcome both gross and subtle laxity and gross and subtle excitement to attain serenity. Overcoming both of those are needed. Okay, so recognizing even their subtle aspects by means of introspective awareness. Okay, persist in your meditation in such a way that you do not come under their influence. Okay, so we want to banish laxity and excitement in all their various forms. Okay? But not only that, there's also other distractions, like, you're focusing on one object and then your mind wants to meditate on another object instead. Okay? So, or you're focusing on one point and your mind is going to another point. So maybe the other object, the other point, it's virtuous, but still your mind isn't doing what it should be doing at that moment. Okay? And of course there's distraction to objects of anger as well. Yeah. Some of us never get around much to the excitement of the objects of attachment. We're too immersed in the objects of our anger, and that's the main one we have to work with. Okay, the order of the 9 stages of setting the mind is as follows. So in Maitreya's text, they talked about 9 stages of setting the mind that are preludes to actual serenity. Okay, so I won't go into these in depth now, but what's happening on each of these is, when you first start out, your mind is like all over the place. You can't stay on the object at all. Then you develop a little bit of ability to stay on the object by increasing your mindfulness. But then, excitement comes in and laxity comes in, and they're both, bombarding you and taking you away from the object. So you work with those, and then you get subtle excitement, and you have to work with that, and then subtle laxity, and then, still the mind's not totally clear. So as you go through these 9 stages, you're in the process of eliminating various faults and developing your ability to concentrate and stay focused. Okay? So the names of the 9 stages are setting the mind on the object. Okay, got to get your mind on the object first. Continual setting, so you have to be able to keep it there, which you do in the 2nd stage. The 3rd stage is patch-like setting, because you're sometimes there and sometimes gone. The 4th is close setting, so you're on the object more of the time. The 5th is called controlling, because you're beginning to control excitement and laxity. Then the 6th is pacifying, so you're pacifying them. 7th is total pacification. The eighth is making single-pointed, because now your mind can really stay on one point, but it still has to exert some effort when you start meditation. And then the ninth stage is called the stage of equilibrium. And at that point, when you sit down to meditate, you don't need effort to be single-pointed. And you have equilibrium because you are not applying antidotes when they don't need to be applied. Okay, because over-application of the antidotes is another fault. Okay, so those are the 9 stages. The technique for actualizing these is through the 6 forces and the 4 activities. So that's as follows. Okay, on the first stage, employ the force of listening to the instructions. So you have to listen to the instructions and know your meditation object. On the second stage, you use the force of thinking about the instructions and learning to keep your mind on the object of meditation longer. On the next 2 stages, you employ the force of mindfulness to keep the mind on the object. Okay, so that's the 3rd and 4th stages. On the 5th and 6th stages, then you use the force of introspective awareness to counter the subtle laxity and subtle excitement. On the 7th and 8th stages, you employ energy to, get your mind into the meditation and get it single-pointed. And then on the 9th stage, you apply the force of thorough familiarity because you're so familiar with how to do the meditation that you don't need to, have so much energy and so on, because your mind's very familiar. You've created a new habit of mind. Okay? Then there's 4 mental activities that you engage in over these 9 stages as well. On the first 2 stages is the mental activity of deliberate engagement. So you have to deliberately put your mind on that object. Okay? It's not going there any other way. Okay, during the following 5 stages, there is the mental activity of interrupted engagement, because you're on the object, but then you're off the object. Okay, so your engagement with your object of meditation is interrupted by laxity, by excitement, by whatever it is that's coming in. Okay, then on the 8th stage, that's this state is called uninterrupted engagement. So once you put your mind on the object, and you still need energy to put it there, then your mind stays on the object of meditation uninterruptedly. Okay, so whatever your meditation object is, the image of the Buddha, the conventional nature of the mind, a nimitta, a subtle sign that's appeared, whatever it is. Okay, on the 9th stage is the mental activity of spontaneous engagement, due to familiarity with which there is no need for further exertion. Okay, so spontaneous engagement, your mind turns towards your meditation object, it stays there because you're so familiar with it, you don't need any extra energy to get your mind there. Okay, so as you're doing the Serenity meditation, going through these 9 stages, you have one object of meditation. You don't change your object of meditation. Okay, because if you start out on one and then change to another, it's like, because the whole thing is to get very familiar with the object. Yeah, and so that your mind really stays on it. If you keep saying, "Oh, I'm tired of meditating on this object. I want to meditate on that, and then I want to do this, and that one," and so then that the mind's pretty restless. Okay, so we select one object of meditation and then keep the mind there. And the Buddha taught all different sorts of meditation objects. Okay, and so sometimes it's according to our disposition, our tendency. For some people, using the 4 immeasurables, immeasurable love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, that's very suitable for them. For some people, meditating on a kasina, on a colored disc, or a disc of one of the 4 elements, is more appropriate. For some people, the conventional nature of the mind, the image of the Buddha, the breath, there's so many different things. Okay? Then, now you've gone through the 9 stages. Then, having gently relaxed your effort with regard to laxity and excitement in relation to the actual object. So you've relaxed your effort because the mind's going in that way anyway. Yeah, you have that momentum, so you don't need to keep, exerting effort. The mind's very familiar with the object. So when familiarity with the practice yields extreme physical and mental responsiveness. Okay, so responsiveness, this is the mental factor that is one of the 11 virtuous mental factors. It's often translated as pliancy or flexibility. Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it as tranquility, but it's not just being tranquil. It's a mind that's responsive. It's flexible. It's suitable. It's not a stiff. What's the word? Brittle. Yeah, it's not a stiff, brittle mind. It's a very pliant, responsive mind. Yeah, and so then the body also becomes very pliant and responsive, so that the body is no longer an obstacle to your meditation. Right now, oh, this hurts, that hurts, I'm uncomfortable, I have too much jittery energy, I've got to move, I got to stretch, and everything hurts. Okay, so at a certain point, with this mental factor of responsiveness, the body is responsive also, and it's no longer a problem in our meditation. It's very serviceable. Yeah, we can use it. So physical, mental responsiveness. And then gaining from those, physical and the bliss of physical and mental responsiveness. Okay, so then the mind and the body both become very blissful. When that happens, that's when you actually have serenity. So actual serenity isn't at the 9th stage of the 9th mental abiding. You have to keep meditating on that until you get the physical and mental responsiveness and the bliss of the physical and mental responsiveness. That's actual serenity. And when you're talking about the stages of jhana, that one is called access concentration. So it's not the full first jhana, but it's an access one in that the hindrances have been pacified, but all the factors, the absorption factors, we went through these on Bodhisattva Breakfast Corner, those aren't completely stable and firm yet. Okay? But still, it's an incredible stage of meditation, so they say, mind just very peaceful. Okay, so Maitreya's discrimination between the middle and the extremes, that's one of Maitreya's 5 texts. He teaches, it's a very beautiful text about the Chitta Mantra view. He says in it, then such a body and mind, having gained great responsiveness, must be engaged and put to use. So this is what I was talking about at the beginning. We don't gain it for its own sake. We have to put it to use. Now, how do we put it to use? Nam Kapel says, having actualized serenity in this way, examine the significance of selflessness as before. So you gained your serenity on whatever object you used. Now you take that mental ability to remain on the object single-pointedly without distraction, and you shift it to the topic of selflessness. Okay? And so you start using that very stable mind to do analysis to see, how do things really exist? They appear truly existent. Do they really exist that way? If they do, I should be able to find them when I search for them. And then you start searching for them. Okay, so you apply it to that kind of meditation. Okay, so having gained familiarity with the technique for balancing a calm, serenity and discriminating awareness. Okay, so we need discriminating awareness. When you are able to derive fresh responsiveness from the impact of analytical meditation itself, not merely the previous responsiveness. That is the gauge of having actualized insight. Okay? So, people say, what is insight? Okay. Actually, insight is the union of serenity and insight. Yeah? How do you unite serenity and insight? When you just have serenity, your mind gains responsiveness through remaining single-pointed on the object of meditation. Okay? And when you're doing serenity meditation, you don't do a lot of analysis, because the analysis, when you're analyzing, you're looking at different objects, you're looking at them from this angle and that angle. So as you're doing the serenity meditation, you don't do analysis. So just the fact of placing the mind on the object is alone what generates the responsiveness and the bliss of the responsiveness when you're doing serenity meditation. And like I said, the analytic meditation, the investigation, disturbs the peace of the mind at that point. When you're trying to combine serenity and insight, what you do is now doing the analysis, doing the inquiry, using that probing awareness to look at how something exists from many angles, that itself induces the responsiveness and the bliss of the responsiveness. So what used to be a hindrance, okay, now becomes the thing that actually induces that mental factor of responsiveness and the bliss of the responsiveness. So when, your investigation itself, you're investigating how things exist. Who am I? Who am I really? Am I my body? Am I my mind? Is this possible? Can I find a real self there? Okay, when that investigation, which gets very, very subtle, is able to induce that responsiveness that makes the mind single-pointed, so that you can have single-pointedness and investigate at the same time without the two things disturbing each other. So that's the unity of serenity and insight. Okay? When you have that unity of serenity and insight with the correct view of emptiness, that and the correct view that is on a conceptual level, that is the dividing line between the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. Okay? When you have that union of serenity and insight non-conceptually on emptiness, then you go from the path of preparation into the path of seeing. Okay? Okay, so serenity and insight should be interrelated or possess common features. In other words, they're both focused on the same object. Yes, when you have the unity, it's not like your serenity is focused on one thing and your analysis on another, okay? They have the same object, they have the same sense base, in this case your mental consciousness, okay? They arise at the same time, they have the same aspect, and they have a similar nature in that one can't exist without the other. So the sage Santipa has said, if you possess the methods as explained for mutually binding serenity and insight, one to the other, they will give rise to the meditation on insight apprehending emptiness. Okay? Now, what's interesting to know is there is worldly insight and mundane insight and supramundane or transcendental insight. If you're a non-Buddhist, or even if you're a Buddhist, if you're trying to progress through the different stages, the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, you develop insight there. But what you use the insight for is to see the faults of the lower state of meditation and the benefits of the higher state of meditation. So that entails some investigation. That's called insight. Okay? So if you're trying, let's say you're meditating on the figure of the Buddha, you're not doing any transcendental insight meditation to investigating the nature, investigating selflessness. But you're meditating on the Buddha, but then you see, oh, okay, I've gotten to access concentration, but that's not the full jhana. I really want the full jhana. Okay, so you see the faults of the access, the benefits of the full jhana. So you actualize the first jhana that way. Then you say, oh, but you know, there's still, the first jhana still isn't as deep as it could be, because we have coarse engagement and sustained engagement. So I need to eliminate those two mental factors to make my concentration even deeper. So I see the faults of the first jhana, the benefits of the second jhana. I meditate very strongly to overcome the coarse and refined engagement. When they're eliminated, then the mind attains, through the power of that insight, it attains the second jhana. So using insight in that way, because it's a mind, you know, that's discriminating, you know, that's called mundane insight. What we're trying to practice here is super mundane or transcendental insight that is focused on the object of emptiness. We're not just trying to get higher levels and deeper levels of concentration. We're trying to actually focus it on emptiness, so that, and then use that to eliminate, to overcome the ignorance on the mind stream. Okay? Okay, so that's the end of that section. We have a few minutes for questions. Yeah?
Is the purpose of that mundane insight to keep you moving so you don't get stuck on that level? And if that's true, isn't bodhicitta enough to...
Okay, so is the
purpose to keep you going without wasting time?
So is the purpose of that to keep you not getting of that mundane insight, not to get stuck on that level? No, the purpose is to get you to eliminate what needs to be eliminated and generate what needs to be generated, so that you can deepen your concentration. Just having the intention for enlightenment, you know, the bodhicitta, that itself doesn't do it. You need to see the faults of the first jhana and the benefits of the second jhana. And also because people who have no bodhicitta also do this meditation, and they want to progress through the different stages of it. Okay? So it's done through that kind of mundane insight, not, you know, if you're a bodhisattva, of course you still have the bodhicitta motivation, sustaining all that. But it's that actual seeing the downside of one and the benefits of the other that does it. Okay. Yeah?
Wonderful. If one is using this what am I, who am I inquiry, then how does one use this union of insight and serenity to further that?
Okay, so if we're doing this inquiry into who am I and how do things exist, how do we use the union of insight, of serenity and insight to do that? You do the investigation, you know, but that investigation generates the pliancy. So the concentration becomes very deep. So when you're doing the investigation, when you really come to the point of there is no truly existent self here, then the serenity is so strong, combined with the insight, that you can stay on that and not waver from it. And through that serenity, then you're really familiarizing your mind again and again and again with, oh, there's no inherently existent person, there's no inherently existent aggregates, everything's empty. Of course, you're not thinking that, you know, but that's the perception that's going on. So that ability to really concentrate, at the same time you're trying to suss things out and reach, you know, a clear, you know, awareness of what emptiness is. That's quite powerful in, you know, really waking us up.
Do you need to go beyond the access level to reach an arhat?
Do you need to go beyond the access level to become an arhat? The the Theravada seems to say no, that you could do it at access level. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think Jay Rinpoche says the same thing, if I'm not mistaken. I think he says too that access is good. Sometimes, like the formless state absorptions, those are way too subtle to meditate, to use effectively in meditating on emptiness.
Does a Buddha learn all of them?
Yeah, a Buddha will learn, because a Buddha has perfected everything to be perfected. So a Buddha could go, knows all those different levels of meditative absorption, and can go from, and even the high bodhisattvas can go from one to the next, and it's an incredible way of training their mind. Yeah?
In the Theravada, there appears to be a big argument between those who are proponents of practicing the jhanas, and then those, including against Vedo, who say that is in the end time wasted, because really they are in a way a huge distraction from really the path of wisdom, insight, training, discipline. And stay on this path, not spend time on the jhana.
So it's a big controversy in the Theravada tradition, how much import to give to practicing the jhanas, because some people say they're really important and essential, and other people say just get access concentration, meditate on selflessness, because if you get the jhanas, you could it can become a distraction and you could get too blissed out and attached to that. So all the traditions have debates between different things. What's very interesting is if you look in the Pali Sutras, when the Buddha talks about his progression to enlightenment, he undoubtedly developed the jhanas. He talks quite explicitly about developing the different jhanas and meditating on selflessness. Now, of course, somebody could say, from the Theravada perspective, okay, I'm speaking from that perspective now, so somebody could say, but the Buddha's special. So the Buddha, because, he had these different qualities that not all the arhats had, he needed those states of jhana, but just to become an arhat, you don't need it. Okay, now I think the Mahayana may approach that a little bit differently, because but I'm not quite sure what the Mahayana approach would be about that. Yeah, they could say, if access is sufficient to realize selflessness, they could say, yes, an arhat has that. And a Buddha undoubtedly needs all the different qualities because he's perfectly perfected. Okay. But, they're usually presenting things to steer us on the bodhisattva path, not on the arhat path. Yeah.
When developing pliancy, would it be correct to say that you might get a little flavor of it, and as you keep practicing, it comes more and more? It's not, because sometimes the way I hear it is like kerplunk all of a sudden.
Oh, okay. Okay. So in developing pliancy, is it something that you develop slowly, because it sounds like when we talk about it that you get it kerplunka, all at once. Actually, any quality we develop gets developed slowly. When we say that you actualize it, it means at that point is when it reaches a certain level of development where it can be used in a different way before. So it's the same as when we talk about far-reaching generosity, they say it's perfected on the first bhumi. That doesn't mean that you don't practice generosity as an ordinary being. So in fact, this mental factor of responsiveness is one of the 11 virtuous mental factors that we have right now. So it's there, but what we need to do is develop it. Okay? Yeah, all these different things, you know, if you hear of anything, they talk about it, you know, kind of coming at this point when it's reaching a certain stage, but you have to train in all these qualities beforehand. Nothing comes, you know, instantaneously. Yeah. I mean, if you need to practice typing, and that's just such a simple thing to become a good typist, then any of these mental qualities, yeah, you need to practice too. You don't just sit down at a typewriter and, yeah.
You mentioned the Arhat and the Bodhisattva. Both of them need wisdom realizing emptiness.
Yes, yes.
So
But
what is the further difference?
okay, so both to become an Arhat and to become a Buddha, you need the wisdom realizing emptiness. So what's the difference between the two? From a Mahayana perspective, it's whether you have the bodhicitta motivation or not. Because without the bodhicitta motivation, you will liberate yourself at arhatship and then stay in that peace, you know, for a long, long time. Whereas if you have the bodhicitta, that will propel you to accumulate more merit, do more purification, deep, you know, learn about emptiness from all different kinds of angles and perspectives so that you can purify the mind completely of all defilements, develop all the qualities limitlessly so that you can become a fully omniscient Buddha and be most effective in benefiting sentient beings. So arhats benefit sentient beings, but they're not nearly as effective as Buddhas are, especially if they're just meditating in their blissful meditation on emptiness, not working for the benefit of sentient beings. Okay. Yeah?
Is there a method for picking this object that you stay on, or is it done with a teacher, or how is that figured out?
Is there a method for
choosing this
for
one
choosing the object?
This one object.
Yeah. Usually people would consult with a teacher, and it depends what kind of practice you're doing and so on. So it's usually done in consultation. Yeah. Okay. So we just have a little section left next week about illusion-like meditation. And then there's kind of a poem at the end that, you know, in a dedication. So maybe we will finish next week. Woo!